Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to announce the construction of the RMS Titanic. This will be the largest and most advanced ship ever built. How long will construction take? 3 years will well.
On the freezing night of April 14th, 1912, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, one of humanity's greatest dreams began disappearing beneath the dark waters. Lights flickered, people screamed, musicians continued playing as the ship slowly sank. Some prayed, others jumped into the freezing ocean, and many still could not believe what was happening, because that ship was the Titanic, the most luxurious, most famous, and most impressive vessel ever built at that time, a ship so advanced that many believed not even God could sink this ship. But only a few hours later, the impossible happened. And today you will discover how the Titanic was built, how much it cost, the hidden mistakes, the fatal iceberg, why the steel hull failed, the desperation of the passengers, who survived, who died, and why this tragedy shocked the entire world. But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who loves mysteries, history, and incredible true events. Now turn down the lights. Imagine the sound of the ocean, and prepare to board the most famous ship in history. Support the channel. Product link in the description. The dream of building the world's greatest ship. At the beginning of the 20th century, shipping companies competed fiercely for dominance of the oceans. They wanted larger ships, faster ships, more luxurious ships. One of those companies was White Star Line. The White Star Line wanted to create something the world would never forget. That dream became the Olympic class, and among those giant vessels stood one name above all others: Titanic.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to announce the construction of the RMS Titanic. This will be the largest and most advanced ship ever built. How long will construction take? 3 years will well.
Construction began in 1909 in Belfast, built by Harland and Wolff. Thousands of workers participated. Men climbed dangerous steel structures. Molten metal flew through the air. Massive cranes moved enormous steel plates. Safety standards were minimal. Several workers lost their lives during construction, yet the project continued, because everyone believed they were building the future. A giant of steel and luxury. The Titanic was enormous. It measured approximately 269 meters long, over 46,000 tons, massive steam-powered engines, 4 giant funnels, luxury unlike anything seen before. Inside were grand staircases, swimming pools, a gymnasium, elegant restaurants, lavish suites, music rooms, massive dining halls. The wealthy traveled like royalty. Some of the richest people on Earth were aboard. The Titanic was not merely a ship, it was a symbol of wealth, power, technology, and human ambition. How the Titanic worked. The Titanic was powered by giant steam engines. Hundreds of workers continuously shoveled coal into enormous furnaces. Coal burned, water heated, steam pressure increased, engines moved, giant propellers pushed the ship forward. The ship consumed enormous amounts of coal every day. Deep inside the boiler rooms, temperatures were unbearable. While wealthy passengers enjoyed fine dining, workers labored endlessly below deck. The Unsinkable ship. Engineers believed the Titanic was one of the safest ships ever built. It contained watertight compartments. If one section flooded, doors could be closed automatically. This innovation led many newspapers to describe the Titanic as the unsinkable ship. Whether anyone truly said not even God could sink this ship remains debated. But one thing is certain: the confidence surrounding the Titanic was enormous, and that confidence would prove dangerous. The lifeboat problem. The Titanic carried approximately 2,224 people, but its lifeboats could hold only around 178 people. Even if every lifeboat was completely full, more than 1,000 people would still have no place. Worse yet, several lifeboats launched half empty. Many passengers simply refused to believe the ship was sinking. That decision would cost hundreds of lives. The Maiden Voyage. On April 10th, 1912. The Titanic began its maiden voyage. Thousands gathered to watch. It was a spectacular sight. A floating city, a miracle of engineering. The destination, New York City, rich passengers. Poor immigrants, families, workers, children, dreamers. All sailed toward a future many would never see. If you're enjoying this story, leave a like. Comment below. Would you have boarded the Titanic if you knew what was coming? Share this video with someone who loves history and true mysteries. And if you'd like to support the channel, the link is below. Inserir texto. The iceberg warnings. Throughout the voyage, several ships transmitted warnings about icebergs ahead, yet the Titanic maintained high speed. Approximately 24 to 25 mil/m, 3941 km/h, fast for dangerous icy waters. The sea was unusually calm, the night was moonless, and the lookouts had no binoculars. Then, shortly before midnight, a giant shadow appeared ahead. Iceberg!
Iceberg!
A warning was sent immediately. The officers attempted to turn, the engines responded, but there was no longer enough distance. The collision. The iceberg scraped violently along the starboard side. Many passengers barely noticed. Some felt only a slight vibration. But below the waterline, disaster had already begun. Freezing seawater flooded multiple compartments. The engineers quickly realized something terrifying. The Titanic was doomed. The Titanic was going to sink. But how could ice tear through steel? This is one of the most shocking parts of the tragedy. Many people imagine the iceberg opened one gigantic hole, but in reality, it created several smaller openings along the hull, and that happened for several reasons. The cold made the steel more brittle. The ocean water was close to the core 28 degrees. At temperatures that low, the steel used at that time became more rigid and brittle. Today, engineers know that certain types of steel lose toughness in extreme cold. As a result, the hull did not absorb the impact well. Instead, it cracked more easily. The rivets were weak. The Titanic's steel plates were held together by thousands of metal rivets. But modern investigations discovered that some of those rivets were of lower quality. When the iceberg struck the hull, many rivets failed, some snapped, others popped loose. The steel plates began separating, and seawater rushed inside. The iceberg did not destroy the ship with a single giant hole. It weakened multiple sections at once, and that was enough. Speed was fatal. The Titanic was enormous. It required a tremendous amount of distance to turn completely. When the lookouts finally spotted the iceberg, there was simply not enough room. As the officers attempted to turn, the iceberg scraped along the side of the ship and damaged multiple compartments. Some experts believe that if the Titanic had struck the iceberg head-on, only the forward section might have been severely damaged, but the long tear along the side proved fatal. Thomas Andrews realizes the truth. Thomas Andrews, the ship's chief designer, personally inspected the damage. He moved through the flooding compartments. He examined the rising water. He calculated the situation. And very quickly, he reached a devastating conclusion. Too many compartments had been breached. The Titanic had been designed to survive flooding in a limited number of compartments. Not this many. Andrews informed Captain Smith of the terrible truth. The ship would sink. The giant vessel had only a few hours left. More than 2,200 lives were now in danger. Panic begins. At first, many passengers refused to believe it. How could the unsinkable ship possibly sink? Some continued listening to music, others kept playing cards, but slowly. The decks began tilting. Objects started sliding across the floors. Fear spread throughout the ship. The impossible was happening. The first men to die. The first victims were likely among the engineers, firemen, and workers deep below deck. Freezing seawater rushed into the boiler rooms and engine compartments. Some men became trapped. Others stayed at their posts. Many engineers continued operating equipment to keep the lights on. They helped maintain power. They helped send distress signals. They bought precious time for the passengers above. Many of them never escaped. Their sacrifice saved lives. Women and children first. The officers began the evacuation. The order was clear. Women and children first. But there were too few lifeboats. Far too few. Families were separated. People cried. Some men accepted their fate and stayed behind. Others desperately searched for a place in a lifeboat. Did the rich survive more often? Yes. And that shocked the world. First-class passengers had a much greater chance of survival. They were closer to the lifeboats. They received information sooner. They had easier access to the boat deck. Meanwhile, many third-class passengers were located on lower decks, had difficulty finding exits, faced confusing corridors, often did not speak English. Many poor families became trapped as the water rose. The survival rates made the inequality painfully clear. Wealthy women had very high survival rates. Many first-class children survived. Large numbers of poor men died. The tragedy exposed the social divisions of that era, the orchestra that kept playing. One of the most emotional moments of the disaster occurred when the ship's musicians continued playing as the Titanic sank. The band members knew the situation was becoming hopeless. They knew the ship was dying, yet they continued performing, song after song, trying to calm frightened passengers, trying to bring comfort amid the chaos, even knowing they would likely never leave the ship alive. To this day, their actions are remembered as one of the greatest examples of courage in the face of death. The Titanic breaks in half. For many years, people believed the Titanic had sunk in one piece, but decades later, when the wreck was finally discovered, investigators found something shocking. The ship had broken in half as the bow filled completely with water. It pulled the rest of the vessel downward. The stress on the structure became enormous. Thousands of tons of force twisted the giant ship. The steel could no longer withstand the pressure. Then came a terrifying sound. Crack! The Titanic split into two massive sections. The bow disappeared beneath the ocean first. The stern remained above the water for a few moments. Then it too began its final descent. The greatest ship in the world was gone. The freezing ocean. As the Titanic disappeared beneath the surface, panic turned into absolute desperation. Hundreds of people were thrown into the freezing Atlantic. The water was deadly. Many suffered. Severe hypothermia, cold shock, cardiac arrest caused by the freezing temperature, extreme exposure. Some victims died within minutes. The screams echoed across the dark ocean. People cried for help. Families called out to one another. Then, little by little, the voices began to disappear. Silence slowly took over the Atlantic. At approximately 2:20 a.m., the Titanic was gone. Who rescued the survivors? The ship that answered the distress calls was RMS Carpathia. The Carpathia raced through the darkness at full speed. Its crew pushed the ship as hard as possible, but the rescue vessel was far away. It took approximately 4 hours to reach the disaster site. When it finally arrived, the Titanic had already vanished. Only lifeboats remained, floating silently on the freezing ocean. The survivors were exhausted, shivering, terrified, and struggling to understand what they had just lived through. How many people survived? Approximately 700 survived. More than 2,500 died. The entire world was stunned. Newspapers across the globe carried the story. Families waited desperately for news. Some received miraculous reunions. Others received heartbreaking confirmation that their loved ones would never return. The hidden mistakes. The investigations that followed revealed several critical problems. Excessive speed, too few lifeboats, overconfidence in the ship's design, inadequate emergency preparation, communication failures, delayed responses to iceberg warnings. No single mistake caused the disaster. Instead, multiple failures combined into a perfect storm. Together, they created one of the deadliest maritime tragedies in history. How the world changed after the Titanic. The sinking of the Titanic changed maritime safety forever. New international regulations were introduced. Ships were required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone. Emergency drills became mandatory. Radio operators were required to remain on duty around the clock. Ice patrol systems were created to monitor dangerous waters. The lessons written in ice and steel would never be forgotten. The Titanic became a legend. Decades passed. But the Titanic was never forgotten. In 1985, the wreck was finally discovered deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean. The giant ship still rested silently on the ocean floor, like a ghost frozen in time. The tragedy became even more famous through books, documentaries, and the blockbuster film Titanic. Even today, millions remain fascinated by that cold night in 1912 because the Titanic represents far more than a ship. It represents ambition, dreams, technology, human error, social inequality, hope, and humanity's fragility in the face of nature. On that freezing night, the ocean proved something to all humanity. It doesn't matter how large the machine is. It doesn't matter how much wealth it carries. It doesn't matter how advanced the technology becomes. Nature can still be more powerful. The Titanic was created to challenge human limits, but it ultimately became an eternal reminder of human vulnerability. And while its wreck rests silently in the dark depths of the Atlantic Ocean, its story lives on. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel, support my work. There's a product link in the description. Share this video with someone who loves true stories and historical mysteries, and tell us in the comments, do you think the Titanic could have been saved?
Set sail on its maiden voyage when it hit an iceberg.